Okay, I think we are live. Welcome everyone to Siren Digital. We are back. It's been a very long time since we've done anything to do with Siren because of everything that's been going on in the wider world. But it's so exciting, so exciting to be back doing stuff again. So if you've not been to a Siren event before, hi, welcome. We are a group of young people based in East Suffolk, and we do events about the environment pretty much, and the aim is to inspire other people to get involved, inspire other people to be as passionate as we are, and also to support each other, because there can be a lot of stressful times when we're talking about the environment right now, especially in 2021. So it's really nice to have you all here, and thank you so much for joining us. Panelists, how are we doing today?
I've been on calls today looking at what we're going to be doing for the global strike on March the 19th. So it's been interesting.
Okay, interesting. March the 19th. Does anyone else know anything about that, involved in that? Johnny was sort of nodding there, I think.
Just out of encouraging agreement that that's a thing that's happening.
It's a thing that's happening. Yeah. Amazing. Marcie, are you involved? Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't actually. I'm not keeping up with the news lately.
Maybe we need to start pushing that on social media and get some more people involved. That'd be really cool. I'm going to just really quickly introduce each of you. That's probably a good thing to do. So we've got Marcie, who is a climate activist based in Berkshire and Surrey. And they used to run a climate action group back when we were at uni together a long time, feels like a long time ago now. And have done tons of on-campus activism, including passing a climate emergency declaration. We've got Emily Thomas, who is a activist based in East Anglia, and she has a passion for dance. And you made an amazing video, a dance video that we'll watch later, all about sea level change along the East Anglian coast. So that's super exciting. We've got Emily Knock, who is a local young climate activist studying at the University of Suffolk. I think you're Ipswich-based, Emily, something like that, yeah. And has been doing tons of climate strikes. We've got a video from this Emily as well, later two Emilys. I'm trying to figure it all out in my brain. And we've also got Johnny, and Johnny is a rapper from Glasgow, and he has a background in climate activism, especially with the younger generation, so primary school and younger secondary school, I think, yeah, which is really amazing. So I'm excited to see the conversation that we're going to have. Just so that everyone watching knows, this is being live streamed to Facebook. The chat is going to be saved. Please go and share the stream on your Facebook pages so that we can reach even more people. Say hi in the chat. Interact with us. I'd love to know what you've been up to this afternoon, if you're involved in the climate strike that we've just been talking about, and we'll definitely be reading out your comments, so chat to us. We've got a hello from Molly. That's really cool. Hi everyone. Hello. Awesome. Okay, so I guess, guys, panelists, let's go straight in at the deep end. You know, like, are there negatives to climate action? And we're going to ask this to the audience as well. Audience, there's a poll that's going to pop up on your screen in a second. Oh, hi Claire Osborne. Have you ever been involved in climate activism is the poll. And yes, panelists, what negatives do you think there are? So let's go Johnny first, maybe. What would you say in like 2 sentences?
The negatives, or if climate activism can be harmful, my impulse is to, in 2 sentences, mention how it can create a disconnect, how certain activities can create a disconnect with the working class communities in any given area that a demonstration is taking place for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Marcie, do you think that's something that you found? Like, what would you build on in terms of what Johnny's just said?
Definitely, I agree with that. I think there's definitely ways that activism can go wrong if not taking into account marginalised groups of people and their experiences, especially with like climate change. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. We've got the results of the poll back before I move on. So we've had 64% of people who have been involved in climate activism, 36 haven't. So we've got a good split there, and we'll see what that percentage is like after this event. Okay. Emily T, what do you think? What negatives do you think there potentially are with climate activism?
I think it's a really interesting one because I think we're quite reactive generally as people. So I think quite a lot of the time we react to the climate activism we're seeing in front of us, and the very small portion of it that we're shown by mainstream media. So then the general kind of consensus for lots of people is what they're being presented as activism equals bad, equals disruptive, therefore I'm then not interested in it, which links to what Johnny was saying, because it then creates that disconnect of if it's an overall perceived as a negative thing, then why would I be interested in the messaging behind it or the end goal of it? So I think it's really interesting when you get that kind of disconnect, and the fact that we're shown so little of what actually is happening out there in terms of environmental activism, and actually the fact that activism means an umbrella of things rather than just, you know, blocking a road, for example. That's a really bad example, but that kind of interesting slither of what we're seeing compared to what's actually out there, I think is interesting.
Definitely. Guys, put stuff in the chat what you think negatives potentially are to climate activism. That'd be really cool. Emily Nock, you've done a lot of different climate strikes in Suffolk in particular. So what do you think maybe on a Suffolk level are negatives, or just in general as well?
Well, for me, I think the biggest issue there is with climate activism is a mental health issue, because it's such an all-encompassing action to take to be an activist that you kind of forget to look after yourself. You're like, I'm just going to push for the climate because this is really important, it needs to be talked about, people need to be aware of it, but you then kind of forget that actually if you just look after the planet, then you're not looking after yourself, and then you can't look after the planet if you're not looking after yourself. So yeah, that's kind of the negative that I see.
I think that's a very good point, and it leads very nicely into our first session tomorrow as well, which talks about nature and mental health. I know that we had this discussion the other day when we were catching up this group, and we were chatting about how we're depressed about what climate change in the future looks like. So you work as hard as you can to make sure that's not going to be the future, but then that doesn't do anything for your mental well-being right now, because you get activist burnout, and it's such a big issue. It's really true. And yeah, Rhett agrees with you, Emily. It takes real courage to go out and break the rules like that. So that's a really good point. Thanks for the comment, Rhett. I'm going to go and play the intro video because I should have done that 5 minutes ago. So Dan, if you want to cue up the intro video so we can all enjoy that, and then we'll get on with our discussion. It's a good plan. I really vibe with that music. It's beautiful. Okay, so we're going to sort of go very swiftly into our next video, which is from Emily Nock, and it is all about your climate activism down in Ipswich, and how you, well, we'll see the video. Let's go straight into it. Let's see how it went.
Hi, I'm Emily, I'm 20 years old, I study fine art at the University of Suffolk, and I'm an environmental activist. I've always been brought up to be environmentally conscious, so make sure you recycle, turn the lights off, don't waste water, etc. But there was also video documentaries from David Attenborough, as well as like podcasts and radio shows and other scientific documentaries that I watched. Then I think the final straw kind of came when Greta started campaigning, and I was like, right, okay. So I decided I was going to do something, and I was going to stand up and use my voice and try and make a change. I have an Instagram blog and a written blog where I try and educate people and show people that being environmentally friendly is easier and cheaper and a lot less complicated and drastic than people think it is. Showing really simple swaps and things, but also like explaining about the climate crisis, the plastic pollution crisis, the other environmental crises, of which there are many, raising awareness about them. I'm going to start doing a Fridays for Future strike on a Friday in Ipswich for the next 3 weeks, and then I'll resume again in the new year. I am also involved in Boycoca, which is a Coca-Cola boycott that we're going to be starting in December, so a month without Coca-Cola products. And the climate clock was released in New York. It says that we only have 7 years left to make a change. I don't understand how big business and governments are still making environmental goals for 2030 or 2050, which is far too late. We're going to be past that 7 years where we can't do anything about the climate. Activism massively influences my artwork. It's changed my whole practice to being much more about the environment and how I can raise awareness and educate people. Within art you can reach people in lots of different ways than maybe you could if you were just being an activist. So I made an animation about plastic pollution. The reaction I got from other people watching it was a lot greater than I ever thought it would be. So it's interesting to see how my activism can influence my art practice and how my art practice can influence my activism and how tied up they are. I think you need to believe in what you're making, and I think this has given me that. It's given me something to say, yes, this has a meaning, this is important. It helps to have passion in what you are making, I think. There are a lot of really simple changes out there that don't cost the earth and that actually will save you money over time. If you think ahead, your impact on the planet will be less. Just try to make a change because it won't be as difficult as you think.
Wow, that's beautiful. I love that you've chatted about your artwork in there as well. Actually, let's really quickly talk about that. How do you feel that your artwork has affected what you've been doing? Sort of how has it developed?
So my practice it's always evolving, always changing, and it very much depends on kind of where I'm at that moment. At the moment it's taking the form of mostly portraiture actually at the moment, exploring different activists. So it's still about the climate crisis, but with a focus on the people behind it, and I'm trying to kind of raise people's awareness of activists who maybe aren't being seen as much, and people who inspire me to go further. That I'm very influenced by what's around me, and especially things that like I'm really passionate about. So it was kind of always obvious to me that the climate was going to work its way into my art somehow.
It's something that I think we like Siren, I say we at Siren, there's not many of us at Siren, but we're all very passionate about the creativity side of communicating about the environment. So we've got a few questions coming through in the chat, which I'll get to in a second, but did sort of everyone you encounter support your cause? What were the reactions to what you were out there doing effectively? And yeah, same question really to the audience. Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, have you been, what's been the response when I think it was 64% of you were out doing your climate activism? And if you weren't out there doing climate activism, how do you perceive it? Would be a really interesting question for the audience as well. But yeah, Emily, what was your experience?
It was very mixed. So very few people stopped, but the people who did stop were really positive, which was really nice, because sitting there on a wall, it was a really cold day, sitting there for ages was like a little bit, well, it was really tiring and a bit kind of draining. So it was nice to have like positive reinforcement of the people that passed by. But there were a lot of people who walked by or who drove by and just kind of looked at me or crossed the road and just was like, what is she doing? And then I kind of promoted it on social media a bit, and some people were like, well, they were really negative about it, whereas other people have been like really positive and really supportive. So it's been a real mix. I think it often depends who it partly depends on the demographic, I think, that you talk to, because I think young people tend to be much more kind of aware of the dangers that we're facing. I think largely because it affects young people so much more. It's our future that is kind of being taken away here. So I think if you talk to a younger audience, then you're going to get a more positive result. But largely it's been a really positive thing. And yeah.
What about the rest of the panel? Like, Marcie, you've done a ton of climate activism out and about different strikes and things. What's been the response when you've been out?
It's usually quite positive. I've definitely been at strikes and protests with various tactics, where usually people stop by and say, oh, it's good what you're doing. Or we went to a protest and there was like an older person with a placard just said thank you. I thought it was nice. But we've definitely had people come up to us and say, oh, climate change isn't real, right? And then it's like, you can't really stop and argue with a person. You can't like deal with them one by one. So we just say, just move on. Just
yeah.
Like, you can just go away. Like,
definitely.
Like, you don't have to explain yourself to every like person that comes with you with nonsense. So you can just say, like, you are free to like move on and not bother me.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, going back to what Emily said, a lot more online as well. People are keyboard warriors behind their computer more than in person, and they'll sort of say that stuff to you more online than, because there's less repercussions, there's less likelihood of you sort of calling them out as much. But I think what you just said really tickled Johnny. He had a little giggle there. Is that something you've experienced as well, Johnny?
Sorry, it's me on mute, I think. Yeah, particularly online, social media, people are a little bit braver. I normally focus on fundraising, doing music events, and things like that. So the vibe's normally pretty good in person, but when we're promoting anything or doing anything online, you always get a good bit of temptation to be involved in a relatively fruitless debate. You just got to be quite good at avoiding that. So well played for not engaging too much.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes not engaging is better for all of our mental well-beings. Yeah. Emily, again, like really quickly, when are you going to start resuming your climate strikes is a question that's come in, which I think is a slightly tricky one given the situation we're in right now, but any sort of rough idea?
Not really. I've had to take a pause on it because I have to focus on my uni work. So my actual strikes are on pause. Like I said, I'm going to be doing the global strike on the 19th of March, and other big strikes, but at the moment my weekly striking is on hold.
Okay.
Hopefully in the summer maybe, but I don't really know.
Let's say that. Let's say the summer. I think that's a good answer. There's a bunch more questions for you that have come in. We might have time to get to them at the end, but I feel like we really need to move on right now. So we've got another video to play. This one is from Emily Thomas, and it's a beautiful dance video. We both have dance backgrounds, and I've got to say, I've seen this and I loved it so much. So let's play that, and I'm really excited for you guys to see it. I just trying not to well up. Everyone's clapping. So we chatted a little bit about creativity with Emily already, but we're going to pop a poll on the screen for everyone watching at home. Nope, that's the wrong one. Is creativity more powerful than traditional activism? Having seen that video, it's very emotive. And I guess, Emily, do you think creativity is an effective form of activism? Like, what's been the response to that video? Because you showed it at another festival as well, haven't you? And
yeah. So it was actually really interesting because that was originally in response to a very it was a very general theme of on the edge, and it was kind of interesting how I instantly took that and sort of ran with it and thought, my kind of interpretation is we really are on the edge of kind of like to what Emily was saying about how the fact like the countdown of 7 years, and then everyone keeps putting these goals of 2050, 2060. It's like we don't have until 2050. So it was interesting to kind of put it in a platform where it wasn't being received by people who were traditionally interested in the environment in the way that I potentially was upon seeing the kind of call out. And actually the main thing that I took from it was the way in which it engaged random people, kind of in the sense that, as you say, people who walk past a strike who then kind of get talking to you and talking about what was happening. I had the response of, I was doing it during a very sunny day in September on Walton-on-the-Naze, which is quite a popular place to visit. So there were lots of people walking past, and meanwhile there's just this random woman running about in the sea. So it's actually really interesting the kind of conversations that it sparked while we were there. We got people taking photos of me. I kept noticing people were like filming me from up on the front, and then later on I put the trailer for it in a community group for that area, and the response was overwhelmingly really positive from people saying, you know, this isn't something that usually I'd engage with, but I got a lot of people saying like, oh, I saw you doing it on the beach and we wondered what it was about and we didn't want to come up and speak to you, but now I'm, you know, potentially going to tune into this event and see it. So it's that really interesting dynamic of kind of like catching passers-by and that sparking those conversations. And I think that's what's really interesting about creative activism, because I think potentially you can reach people who would be otherwise quite kind of disconnected and sort of blinkers on about what they're doing in their life. So it was a very interesting experience, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You're reaching people that you wouldn't necessarily normally reach. So the poll results we have got are 45% people say yes, creativity is more powerful than traditional activism. 27% of people say no, and 27% of people say they don't know. So yeah, that's interesting. I'd love to, you know, if you guys want to put your reasoning in the comments so that we can have a read in the chat about it, that'd be really cool. How did those conversations go with people? Sort of. So one of the questions that we've got come in is, like, how did you try and persuade people that you were chatting to when they came up and like asked you questions when you were performing and stuff? Or did they need persuading? It's probably a good question.
Yeah, some of them. I think weirdly, I think what helped, and this is going to sound really bizarre, is the fact that I was quite literally, you know, when I was having these conversations with people, it was at the point where I'd been in and out of the sea doing this for hours, and it, you know, even though it was sunny, the water was absolutely freezing and I was like dripping wet and way away from any public transport as well. So a lot of the conversations were kind of centered around like, what on earth are you doing? Like, are you okay? Why are you in the sea? So it was really interesting kind of starting from that point of like, there's a reason why I'm doing this, which is it's difficult. It's not comparable in the sense that, you know, if someone's dedicating their whole life to climate activism and sort of putting their body at risk, it's not the same, but it's kind of that thing of that sort of link between endurance and actually really going out and I don't know, putting yourself in a vulnerable position, even if it's not in the same sense of physically, say, laying down in front of a moving vehicle. I think it's, and when you involve to me, like, the art that I create is very personal to me, and I get quite like not possessive, but I'm always really worried about how people perceive it. So I think it's really interesting when you then kind of put it out into the world and try and get that reception. So a lot of the conversations went really positively, but I think it's also where the interesting thing between like creative activism and more traditional activism comes along, because sometimes a couple of people who are kind of a little bit disregarded towards the environmental side of it were more focused on like, oh, you're a lovely dancer, and I was like, that's brilliant, but it's a really fine line, I think, between seeing past like the aesthetics of what you're doing and the actual message. So absolutely. I think that's kind of where the whole inspiration for like the thrashing around in the sea at the end, because I wanted to actually feel like I had been tossed and turned around in the sea rather than just getting in for 5 minutes and pretending. So
yeah, absolutely, and it comes through in the video as well really nicely. We've got a nice quote here from Rhett: art can open up people and appeal to their curiosity and emotions in a different way to, for example, stopping a tube train by standing on top of it. You connect with people when they're more open, perhaps, than if you disrupt their lives more radically, which I think is a very good point. But I do think there is a space probably for radical activism as well, and I know that Johnny and Marcie and Emily will probably agree with me on that. Any of you guys want to speak to maybe the combination that whether you think it's a combination or whether it's one or the other?
I think there's no sort of competition between the two. I mean, creativity or like artistic methods in activism, like that's not like a new thing. That's always kind of been done alongside maybe like direct action. There's no like one way to do something to represent a movement. And people obviously have different abilities. Obviously not everyone can like go to a protest, but there's lots of different ways that people can get involved. So I don't think there's like competition between the two. You can do both, you can do one or the other, whichever one is right for you, but they definitely like coexist happily.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think what you just said about sort of protesting can be inaccessible for some people, especially if you're disabled or if you've got kids and all that kind of thing. So it gives people the chance to still play their part in the movement without, just play their part in general in a way that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. It's a really nice point. So yeah, Marcie, stick around, because we were going to chat with you a little bit more about what you've been up to in your activism and things. And the question that I had for you, which I think we discussed this at length when we were students, sort of sat around having a drink and getting frustrated at the world. You're obviously very involved in political activism as well. Should we take the climate crisis out of party politics, and what position does party politics have in tackling the climate crisis?
I know this is like a stance that's quite popular for going like beyond politics, but I don't think you can take the politics out of environmentalism, because the decisions to how we tackle climate change are political decisions. They're being undertaken by like big P politics. So you can't divorce the two. You can't pretend to be blind to politics in your environmental campaigning. There's just no way to separate the two, unless the only sort of environment you wanted to focus on was your own garden, and even then, you'd probably have to think about your council. So I'm just babbling on now, but yeah, there's no way you can divorce the two. If you're thinking about like global climate change, there's no way you can be blind to politics. But that's not to say that there isn't this one kind of politics that you can believe in. Like, that's not saying like environmental movement is only like one kind of politics. Obviously there's different routes through politics to environmental activism. Different parties will have, like, for example, different parties will have different solutions to climate change. So it's what you believe is the right way forward. Yeah, but
I think it's interesting.
Does that make sense?
No, you're making perfect sense. I think it's interesting because there's definitely environmentalists out there who kind of dream of just living off the grid, having zero carbon impact on the environment whatsoever, and just be like, that's my bit. I've done my bit for the climate and for the environment. Like, I'm not having any impact whatsoever. But I feel like not everyone necessarily on this call probably would support that and be like, there's more that we can be doing than just reducing our own carbon footprint and things like that. Does anyone have any thoughts and comments on that kind of vibe? Yeah, go on, Emily, and then we'll do Johnny afterwards. Fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's really important to do your own bit, but we're kind of past that point now, and we need to repeat the rhetoric. We need a system change, not individual change. Like, individual change is super important, but now we need to see the big changes happening. We need to move away from fossil fuels. We need to stop using cars and start investing in renewable energy and stop flying so much. And, things need to change on a big level for any real impact to happen now, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Johnny, what do you think on this topic?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Emily was saying about it being system change. I think when we have these conversations with kids, they're actually surprisingly receptive to the idea that there's to take personal responsibility for some of these problems. I think everyone would agree that you're supposed to take responsibility, and it's a big key word because you can take personal responsibility, but you can also get involved in the social responsibility for what it is that's happening, which is normally the responsibility on larger bodies than just an individual, like your councils or government or even international bodies. And if these governments or councils are in any way responsible for the environment, then a part of the individual and their responsibility is to help encourage governments to do the right thing. Is probably the best way to put it. If we have enough people asking them to do something, they tend to do it. And so part of our individual responsibility is recycling, but also, putting pressure on local MPs and government to do the right thing.
Absolutely. And I think there's so many different ways we can do that, so many different styles of activism. When we've talked about creativity, we've talked about striking and getting out in the streets. Is there any other, what other forms of activism do you think are viable in terms of us making sure that change is happening? I mean, there's a lot of debate in the comments right now about global corporations over national, what's Faye said? I think we need global corporations like the UN rather than attempting to make global change on a national level. Although national level plays a huge role in environmental movement and sustainability, it should come from a higher power, which is an interesting point. But us as everyday people, how are we going to have that effect on the UN is very tricky. Anyone got any sort of thoughts on internationalism versus nationalism? Yeah, go on, Johnny.
Yeah, just quickly, because I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, it kind of works in the reverse. Rather than orders coming down from the top, a lot of the times with these kinds of things, they come up from the bottom. So if we can pressure our councils can in turn pressure their parliament, who can in turn pressure the larger bodies. And the more people on their local level that are making these sort of changes to even the local MPs, the bigger the chance is. It's not the only way of doing it. Obviously, if there's a big smog cloud over one area of the planet, that affects the entirety of the planet. So you can have a perfect utopian environmental country over here, but it won't make much difference in the long run if the whole community isn't doing it. So yeah, I completely agree with that.
Really, really good points made. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add on that topic before I move on? Okay, awesome. In that case, Johnny, stick around. Let's talk about your music because you're going to play us out at the end of this. I know you're really passionate about diversity and inclusivity in activism, and a lot of your music and your poetry does have a climate and activism kind of twist to it. In what way do you use your music to communicate to sort of a wider audience about the issue? And just tell us a bit about the activism that you do.
Mostly I'm supporting other organisations through fundraising or setting up live events or organising gatherings where we talk about and promote the work that these organisations are doing. A lot of the time it's not me directly that's involved in the actual activism. The only thing that I do personally is through music, but also teaching in schools, or teaching anywhere really. We're mostly in schools. But,
do you want to move a little bit closer to your mic? You're quite quiet.
Of course. Yeah, so it's mostly in schools that we do the teaching, and I think that one of the most powerful effects that I've seen happen is that when you're sitting around with a group of kids, we were doing it in the primary schools in Springburn, they'll talk about their anxieties of their own future. Everyone here has mentioned how we have much less than 2050 or 2030 before we have to worry about these problems. And most children are more or less completely aware of that, and it's affecting how they feel about the future, how they are making plans for the future. They've got a lot of anxiety around that. And when you get kids to express themselves about climate change, they will tend to go in that direction, as well as obviously cover all the main talking points about how it's terrible that we're killing the planet and all these things that are dead intuitive. But what happens is the parents react to the fact that their kids have been worried about these things. A lot of parents will come to me and be like, I didn't know they were worried about this. We need to include this in what we're actually thinking about, because we care about our kids, want our kids to have the best possible life, but we didn't know that climate change was part of that, you know. And so that's been really helpful, like a way of engaging parents through what their kids are learning to express themselves, and they're getting that across to their parents. Yeah,
definitely. I think what's really interesting is we obviously, pretty much everyone involved in this is 16 to 25, and we know a decent amount about climate activism and the issues, but you work with an age group younger than that, and they are arguably just as concerned as we are. And we've got a video in one of our live streams tomorrow from Hazel and Laura, who went around sort of 9 to 11-year-olds asking them their thoughts. And it's a bit manic. They're all sort of all over the place running around the playground, but they all know what it is, and they're all so worried and so concerned. And it, like, my heart goes out to them because they're so young. So for the rest of you, in terms of, and let's keep this one probably quite brief because we're going to have to move on soon, diversity and inclusivity in activism, like it's tricky, but in 2 or 3 sentences, what can we do to make sure that we're being more diverse and more inclusive in our activism?
I think a lot of times diversity and inclusion is kind of put up as this sort of unreachable goal, and I think lots of people use it and then they're not actually taken to account for those claims that they're making. So I think a lot of it is from the ground up, really. I think making sure we're reaching out and engaging in those communities. And I think that's where creative activism has a potentially important role, say, rather than we're going to come from outside your community into your community and do something and leave. I think it's really about building those relationships. I think like what Johnny was saying about talking to young people, really young people, I think it's about involving those communities and what they want to do and how they want to see change and how they can engage with it, rather than just thinking, I'm going to come and take my style of activism talking about environment and just drop it in, because that doesn't work and that won't leave any sort of lasting relationships. So I think it's actually about getting in these communities, engaging with them, and again, just making sure your art is accessible to people and you're, as much as they can be, what you're putting out there is reachable to all groups that you can think of.
Yeah, definitely.
I think one thing that I've learned kind of through being online and being in the kind of global group of activists is that there's a lot that you don't know that other people know, especially people in MAPA countries, and the best thing to do is just to listen and to say, okay, I didn't know that, I'm going to raise you up and project your voice. So listening to people who actually are directly impacted by what's going on, and raising them up and promoting them as much as you can, because there's a lot of kind of white-centered activism in the climate community. So, or that's what gets seen most. So raising up the people who are just as hardworking and are there and doing all the work but don't get heard. I think that's kind of that's what diversity and inclusivity is for me, is promoting those who don't get heard.
Yeah, I think what Emily said is great. I was going to make more or less the same point, that environmental activism does have it's very easily whitewashed. So that's definitely something that I think needs to be taken into consideration. And I think people, or us as activists, need to come at it with a very humble mindset of, not being defensive. There's people that might know a lot more than you, and then maybe you need to be like, okay, I didn't know this, thank you for teaching me. So yeah, I just thought that was great what Emily said. And yeah, like I was saying earlier, with there's different methods to protest or take action. So there's definitely ways for people with disabilities to get involved one way or another. I think that's what makes this movement, or any movement, great, because there's so many different ways into it. There's not a requirement you have to be on the street. So people with different abilities or different talents can definitely find some way to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I never would have thought of a way of communicating about sea level rise through dance, and yeah, Emily's managed to do it. It's quite a feat. I'm really impressed. We've got a bunch of things coming through in the chat. People chatting about the most powerful thing is to vote, action on pressure on policy changing, voting within your political parties, things like that, shifting views across the board, local, party and federal. Yeah, everyone chatting about how amazing it is that people talk about environmental conservation from such a young age. Primary school children starving for knowledge. We need an environmental curriculum, which is a really good point. And I'm sure we could do another 2-hour session on that another day if we wanted to. And a great point, Emily, about knock-on effects, and listening to all the voices in the system is vital to find the most powerful and creative ideas overall. So everyone's vibing, which is really nice. I'm so glad. I was going to be treat people with kindness in the comments, please. But we seem to all be on a very similar, I've got it on my t-shirt as well. We all seem to be on a very similar page, which is lovely. I'm going to bring Zoe onto the screen now, and Zoe's going to chat about everything else that's going on in the festival this week, how you can support us on social media, things like that. And then Johnny's going to play us out. But thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to all these amazing panelists. You've been amazing. And yeah, Zoe, go for it.
Wow, thanks guys. That was such an interesting chat, and definitely opened up some things we didn't know we would be talking about. So make sure to check out our tickets to our other events this weekend. Tomorrow morning we're going live at 12 with Can Nature Improve Our Mental Health? So tickets are over on Eventbrite. I think Sophia's put a link in the chat. And in this session, we will be joined by Tom Curry, who's a motivational speaker and mental health first aider, along with Poppy Brown and a freestyle rapper named Dime Trip. We'll be sharing some simple tips and methods for using local natural environments to improve well-being, along with meditation and live music. You can sign up to our mailing list to hear from us and about our future events, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. I can see there's lots of questions in the chat, so head over to either Twitter or Instagram using the hashtag Siren Digital, and we will get back to you as soon as we can.
Okay, amazing. Johnny, go for it. I'm so excited to hear your music.
Apologies, I don't get this mute thing. I think I've got it. First of all, I just wanted to say apologies for not actually including any instrumentals here. This is I wanted to just sort of do a cappella, if that's okay. If I was to treat you the way I would like to be treated, I would berate you on a daily basis. So I'll treat you how you'd like to be treated, and I'll try to keep it painless. I'll keep a card up my sleeves at all times, and I'll save my aces in a conversation that's laced in saltires or saving graces. See, it's hard to hit a bullseye on a target that keeps changing faces. Introspection leads me down the darkest and the strangest places. Directed outwards, I'll only manage the vaguest statements, and I don't have time to be clever or smart with the way I frame this. I'm the guy at the job interview talking about the climate crisis because they've asked me what I'm passionate about. I get excited. A life of studying these affairs left me with some heavy vices. I don't have a car yet, mum, not even a driver's licence. Life's a Kaylee. And I never learned the finer dances. Activists are out fighting fascists, and I'm nursing a pint of acid. My mind is flaccid. Looking at all of the wine and ashes, I'm struggling even to catch up with most of the time that's passing. I'm broken, can't you tell? I wouldn't be writing about living a life that was less frightening if I could actually control myself. I guess I'm worried about some kind of global opportunity, smoking what's left of my emotional maturity into total obscurity. I read the paper because it pisses me off, I like it. And every time I think I'm falling in love, I fight it. I'm replicating these ciphers into these broken glass, wondering if I can, before I blow my chance. I wish I could come through a portal and hold my hand. I know he's gone, so leave me alone or bring my potions, man. Sometimes I think I'll end it, but instead of acting on the notion, I take the pain that's hidden inside and I pen it. I write a joke, but it never made the final edit. I wish I had somebody to hold. There, fine, I said it. I'm not cold or uncared, I'm comfortable in misery. They say that's what a life of doing nothing does to you. I tell myself I've been developing as a writer. I never took a blade to my wrist, but I might have. When John dies, remember Johnny Cypher. John tried, but he's never really been a fighter. You lose when you play, so I sleep alone, and when the bad mood hits, it's the cipher that keeps me going. It's the aspect of me that might have made my father proud. I'm a clown masquerading as a jester. Gather round. I'll paint a picture of how this whole world can be while ignoring the fact that it still hurts just for my lungs to breathe. They say a newborn infant dies if it isn't held. Am I love sick or sick of love? I can never tell. All the laughing, all the joking, all the drinking, it never helped a bit. It'll end for me the same way that it did for Stringer Bell. A ghost from the past chasing me up a staircase. Another comes down from above and I don't get a word in edgeways. Until that day, get out of my headspace. I'm not going to change lanes, not without consent, mate. And something tells me I'm not going to forget. Is the whiskey really done? Can you not pour me some dregs? My only regret so far is it only gets so far. Before I break apart into this resentful art, I wish I had the resilience to inject some charm into these dishevelled bars about a neglectful heart. Rubber's worn away, but still my pencil's sharp. I feel like a wildlife reserve knowing I'm Central Park. Surrounded on all sides by the noises of a city, constantly reminded why this world is so shitty. I need the music or I'll lose it. I need a routine nervous breakdown and I need a doob to soothe it. But keeping medicated when you're feeling dedicated is one way of standing still. Might as well take my leg and break it. I'll never make it if I don't leave my comfort zone, but talking is so comfortsome and that's why I don't have a phone. And these days I can't even say I'm trying my hardest. A suffering artist only works if you're an artist. And I'm a fake. I'm making all the same mistakes every day. I wake and bake, I scrape the tray, I get no restraint. Irrespective of the damp corners from where I came, I can honestly say that I will attempt to break the chains. I've committed to a life of making change, even if it turns out that I am just another vacant aging waste of space. But F slowing the vehicle down at this point, I'm breaking the brakes. It's ever forward from here. I'm raising the stakes, and when I'm gone, who's taking my place? You want to tarnish a rebel's memory? Just make them a saint. Cheers. Thanks. That doesn't ever get less weird. Okay, and I've got one more, if that's okay with you. So as I say, a lot of anxiety around climate change, and I spend a lot of my time going around into pubs and having big rants about the problems, but also the solutions, and just how easy it would be to actually solve them if we would just have the political motivation to push through it. And after about 20 minutes of that, and everyone's starting to like lose the will to live, I'm like, this is my whole life. I won't deny that I'm hurt when someone tries to take a kick at my wee empire of dirt. You see, for me there's no difference between the artist and the person, except for the artist in me tends to struggle with expression. I'm trying to reconcile having a sense of urgency while recognising that most of my biggest lessons are way out there in front of me. I'm years behind the intellectual wing of the movement that seems to have given up on the idea that anything is improving. The climate scientist that's losing all hope. As displaced farmers are being forcibly removed from their homes, and this is all over the globe. We're addicted to growth, but keep on extracting and consuming until we're crippled and broke. I can imagine that they'll hire the military to protect our resourceful and our private industries over the horde of crying innocents, all horrible violent imagery, and we will have no plausible deniability. But I guess it's good for the health to just pretend we're progressing, to pretend that the climate summit in Paris was anything other than an internationally sanctioned group therapy session. This is the kind of shit that I've been scared of addressing. I can't imagine a conflict that doesn't end in aggression. I've poisoned myself with an excess of resin, become a shell of the person that can suppress the resentment, and I hate that I'm my biggest obstacle. I genuinely wish that giving up was optional. I was building up my stuff, but then I lost control. Now I'm feeling dimmer and blunt, no longer audible. It's kind of horrible, but I can't help but note the parallels between my own bad habits and the planet's health. We need to get mad as hell, because all of these plans, they're only going to plan themselves. Cheers.
Wow. That was amazing, Johnny. we've got like a bunch of WhatsApp groups that we're all in, and everyone's going, "Oh my god, I love him! He's amazing! Thank you so much." I put a link to his SoundCloud in the chat, and there's tons of details about all of the panelists over on the website, and all their social media handles, things like that. If you want to go follow us all, thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely evening. Good night.
Yeah.